Good afternoon. It is 12 noon on Wednesday, the 12th of February. Thank you very much indeed for taking time out to listen to me, Anthony Haynes, registered nutritional therapist and head of technical services at Nutri-Link. I'm presenting on sports nutrition, the most relevant and important principles. And so welcome to us all. Thank you so much for taking time out. And busy lives, time is the most precious thing. So what are we going to cover in this topic? And as usual, I'm going to allow you to ask questions. Difficult for me to answer them during the webinar process, to be honest, because of the amount of data and information we're going to get through. But if there's certainly a question, please send me an email at this address. We've got 48 hours effectively to do it, and please do it by then. It's very difficult to then add on others, depending on how many questions we get. But if it's a case history question, you must go to the CE forum to post your case history. But if it's a question about, no, shall I use glutamine for this, or shall I use zinc for that? And what about this? And I've heard this is good for sports nutrition. Questions about the information I'm sharing today, do send me an email in the next 48 hours. I'll do my best to get that answered and out by next week. Sometimes it takes a bit longer. So I'm not going to read through these objectives particularly, but it's about the principles. It's about how to support immunity while individuals are training really hard. And how much protein is needed. Some really interesting information about that. What's the ideal macronutrient ratio? Is this a proportion that I can refer to all my athletes and people involved in sports? Which micronutrients are maybe of the most importance? And you may be aware of the subject of antioxidants being potentially controversial, or the antioxidants may not be helpful, and I'll be talking about that, and which nutritional supplements, briefly touching on the list of most popular and well appreciated ergogenic aids that can support sports performance, and then how much food you need to eat to gain muscle if you're doing some weight training, and I mean, what have you got to eat to actually gain the strength and gain the muscle. So we will dive in and recognize that sports clients or athletes or sportsmen and women, and I may refer to sports folk as athletes, but I appreciate their sports folk. They can be different. They're just different. They may perceive themselves as different to the average person, and they may well because they're so much fitter. But they also may not come in with the same attitude as others. They may simply want to have improved performance, but not realize that actually they didn't come in. I want to change my diet. I just want to take that supplement, or I just want to do the smaller. They don't really appreciate that everything is connected and what goes on in their symptoms. Oh yeah, I've got loose stools all the time, and I've got eczema, and I don't sleep very well, and I grind my teeth, and I've got terrible wind, and they don't seem to realize that those things are super connected to their overall health. So there can be a bit of a disconnect, and sports can focus on their event only. So I always recommend, as I'm sure you will do, is to establish what they want and what the goals are at the outset, and then you can aim to meet that, as opposed to projecting onto them what you think they should be doing, or when they just want to run the 400 meters or run the marathon quicker, or recover quicker from exercises and so on. You also may need to appreciate that, particularly with runners, but also any endurance athlete, that certainly whole grains and whole food is not well handled by some, because it's they're going up and down the whole time in their guts, and then they might need a rapid hit of refined carbohydrates, and that may actually be more suitable for them rather than a whole food or a low GI food. They might need a high GI food. So there are some basic differences with sports clients, I think. So we begin with the most relevant principles. Basically, yes, your diet and supplements can influence your performance markedly. Absolutely no doubt about it. And it's one thing that often could be the last that an individual appreciates about what's going on. So they train really hard. Usually effort is usually 100%, and they train really hard and potentially overtrain. They may have great insight into sports psychology, or they may be aware that's a vital area. And although they give lip service to nutrition, they may not all engage in it. So the nutrition could be the last part, and it will really make a difference to their overall well-being. Unfortunately, too many athletes may come to a nutritionist only when their health has suffered as a result of not paying too much attention to it. Everyone responds differently to the same foods, nutrients, and supplements. So yes, everyone's different, just like every other client. So you start where the athlete's at, and my proposal is you make stepwise changes to implement those improvements. I wouldn't recommend radical changes, particularly when an athlete's involved in training, which could disrupt what's going on. They could have some ebbs and flows of how they feel. And that might interfere with their performance, and then they have a downturn, and then they can blame the changes in nutrition. So step-by-step changes, and I think that's probably best taken on by sports folks. So everything's tiered in gold. Lab tests, really, really useful for athletes in particular. So I'm not saying you can try anything, but certainly find a most specific nutritional and or functional medicine test that can really give insight into what's going on in their health and or something that can be monitored in the future. Really great motivating tool. And I would say an ideal dietary intake is almost always going to be comprised of a balance of protein, carbs, and fats, as it is with the normal population. And they're going to be food sensitivities. They're going to be digestive issues and likes and dislikes. So it's not going to be a radical or in a plastic box or plastic packet. This is a sports nutrition because it says sport on the side of it. So it's really it's just appreciating these factors. And importantly, since muscle relies on protein for ongoing synthesis, sufficient protein is absolutely vital of the right quality. I'll dive into that, as the Americans say, in some depth. Optimal hydration, yes, it's basic, but it's so important. I'll be covering that too. Protecting against infections and injury, and I would say this is the one where if the athlete knows that, okay, I've got the protein sorted, I've got my hydration sorted, but infections and injury, if you can prevent injury and infection, or you can curtail that for the shortest time, that makes an absolute breakthrough. And to me, it's a cornerstone of what optimal sports nutrition is about, is preventing infections and injury. Hugely relevant. You can imagine if you go a season without being injured or infected, just where that season would lead you. It's a phenomenal difference. Then each sport or athletic event will have its own unique needs, its own cultures, its own sort of traits and brands, but the same principles apply. But I recommend you all do a bit of swatting on an event or a sport if you're not familiar with it, and do a bit of reading around the subject so you can at least engage in conversation, and that makes a big difference as well. If the athlete has a sense you have no idea of that particular sport, even if you have brilliant information about nutrition, it doesn't go down so well. So also, I recommend also a bit of swatting. Find out who's in the team, or what's the kind of the talk about in terms of an event, or where's the international events being taken place? Are they in the heat of Qatar, or is it in the cold of Scandinavia? You know, find out where these things are going on. And there are a number of limited number of ergogenic aids, things you can take that can improve sports performance. But of course, you've got to be training hard to get the benefit. So we'll start with hydration. It's one of the most single vital aspects of sports nutrition, absolutely. Do not just go with thirst, that doesn't work. And not all sports result in an obvious loss of sweat, whereas others will do. But all sports performance will be influenced strongly by hydration status. So consuming sufficient water is the first consideration, and then ensuring sufficient electrolytes comes next. And there's a bottle here of the Elite Body Bio Balanced Electrolyte Concentrate. Been a huge fan of that for years. And I'm going to give you one tip. It's not on the slide, especially involved in endurance events, but really anything, whether it's a sport such as football or rugby, where you've got a 40 or 45 minutes and then a half time. Take a little swig of the electrolyte concentrate neat, as long as you've done this in training beforehand. Never do something new on the day of the event. And take the swig, and take the electrolytes in, it helps to charge. And as soon as you start exercise, the exercise shuts the kidneys down, and you hold the charge of the electrolytes in your body. And so really great tip that from actually the makers of that particular product. I've used that for years, the Body by Elite. So really great product. You can't really take too much because it's the ideal balance of electrolytes in the body. And it really effective, of course, protecting against cramps, but hydration, allowing the water to get in the cell and out of the cell. So it helps with detoxification as well. As optimal hydration, vital indeed. So we know that water is vital for athletic performance. It maintains blood volume, it regulates body temperature, it helps with muscle contractions. It's involved in perspiration, as you probably know, and also basically helps to regulate the body's status quo. Sweating, as you know, is the body's primary way of maintaining optimal body temperature, and optimal body temperature is also vital for optimal performance. And so, sure, consuming liquids replenishes the fluids lost during exercise, and restoring fluids maintains normal muscle function, and it helps prevent a decrease in physical performance and reduces the risk of heat stress. And hydration is one of the main means by which you can prevent injury. So really, really important to remain adequately hydrated. And again, to me, the electrolytes are brilliant and across the board useful for almost any athlete of any kind. What's interesting is there's no agreement on how much water everyone should drink, and nor there is what's called a good index of euhydration, so optimal hydration status, that we can do tests on people. So you can't actually, it's fascinating, there's no test to test how well hydrated someone is. There isn't that to do, but obviously looking at someone's intake and looking at their body weight before and after exercise is a good idea. And they say that a loss of sweat that's equal to 2% of body weight, and that's going to be an endurance event or a sport played over 2 halves, as it were, that can cause a noticeable decrease of physical and mental performance. Just 2% of body weight makes a big difference. Losses of 5% during physical activity may decrease capacity by about 30%. So a small amount of water loss, massive impact on performance. In addition to dehydration affecting the capacity to work, losses of perspiration greater than 2% increases the risk of nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, and GI problems. We may be familiar with seeing that, perhaps watching the Olympics or the World Championships, where we see long distance runners stopping by the roadside for that particular purpose. Not much fun. Now, here are some causes of dehydration, and how it affects exercise performance. So reduced blood volume, decreased skin blood flow, decreased sweat rate, and then the heat is not dissipated properly. You have an increase in core temperature, and you have an increased rate of muscle glycogen use if you're dehydrated. So you're going to deplete your glycogen faster, and then you're going to hit the wall. And you also have a reduced maximal cardiac output. So really good list of things as to what goes wrong when one is dehydrated. And again, as with not being able to ascertain what adequate or optimal hydration is, there's no universal agreement on the amount of fluid that you need to consume during prolonged exercise in warm environments. But the general consensus is better to drink water than to drink nothing, but also drinks with carbohydrate alone and or electrolytes alone, i.e. separately, may promote a better performance than drinking water alone. And so you may be familiar with certain brands that have done some marketing, and they say this had a better result than water alone, and that may well be true. It's not the sort of thing you want to drink at any other time, however, of the day, only when exercising, in terms of like a sports drink. But the athletes must consider their hydration status before beginning exercise, rather than just during, and afterwards as well. So the hydration, absolutely key, and it's vital to get a diary, not just of an athlete's food intake, but about their liquid intake as well. Vital to get that recorded and known when you meet them. Fluid intake during prolonged exercise should be sufficient to prevent that loss of 2% of pre-exercise mass. So again, how often is your athlete or your sports person measuring their weight before and after to know? And that's a really good gauge of hydration status. Are they sweating out more and they've lost 2% of body weight or not? And so are the scales around? Can they engage in that? So are you going to be able to measure that? Because it's not as simple as looking at what goes in and comes out. And there's no recommendation that's the same for everyone. And really, everyone needs to have an individualized hydration strategy to protect their health and preserve performance. So really important to focus on that and getting the details. So it's diet history, but fluid history and fluid intake, vital that individuals measure it beforehand. And if the athlete is asked to measure it, that in itself can improve their awareness of it in the first place, but also they'll know you're knowing to ask the right questions. And so we move on to immunity, vitally. So illness means no training. If you're ill, you can't train, and that's going to reduce your ability to get better. And so the graph of performance and strength, etc., and endurance is going to go down when you're ill. So that leads to frustration for every sports person and athlete. They want to get fixed soon. Many individuals push themselves too hard, and that increases the risk of illness. However, what's interesting is that regular, moderate exercise, and that might be someone that you get to see as well, is definitely associated with reduced incidence of infection compared to sedentary folks. So there's like a bell-shaped curve, actually. If you do nothing, you're more likely to get an infection, and if you do too much, you're likely to suppress the immune system effectively. And it seems that prolonged bouts of strenuous exercise, particularly when it's prolonged, i.e. continuous exercise, that can lower immunity for 3 to 24 hours after exercise, again, depending on the intensity and how long the exercise bout was for. So really important athletes focus on immune protection. It may be very obvious from the nature of the training or the sport or the athletic event as to how hard the training might be, but really a lot of athletes in sports, it's full on in so many sports now, and immune protection is going to be needed. Post-exercise immune function or dysfunction is most pronounced when it's continuous, as I've said. So especially if it's over an hour and a half, and if it's moderate to high intensity and performed without food intake, because carbohydrate during exercise can actually protect against immune dysfunction afterwards. So really, if you're doing intense training lasting for a week, if you've got a hard sort of a week of training before the season, that might last in a longer lasting immune dysfunction than just the 24 hours afterwards. Elite athletes are not necessarily clinically deficient immune-wise, but certainly a number of small factors can then lead to a compromise in immunity, leading to minor illnesses, particularly upper respiratory tract infections. So it's URTIs, not UTIs, but upper respiratory tract infections. Then you could say, this is a devil's advocate, maybe it's a small price to pay, because if you exercise, you have an anti-inflammatory effect that's mediated through cytokines and or down-regulation of toll-like receptor expression. Effectively, and that gives you the health benefits of regular exercise. So you need to appreciate where your athlete is at. Are they getting ill too often? Is that one of the goals? So stopping them being ill is vital. Here's a lovely little diagram by Michael Gleason. He's been at Loughborough. I think he's Australian. He's in Australia now. He's produced lots of papers on this over decades, in fact. So a really sort of top researcher in this field. And so we've got a nice understanding that exercise can lead to decreased toll-like receptor expression, which can lead to decreased macrophages and Th1-oriented cell cytokine production. That generally is sort of the home defense is diminished, and that can lead to impaired immunity and inflammation, and that can increase the risk of viral infections. It's interesting, it's believed that there are very few, nearly so many bacterial infections in athletes compared to viruses, interestingly. And you can see the effect on adrenaline, cortisol. You can see the influence on interleukin-6, which can be increased effectively, and there can be a lack of beneficial calming interleukin-10. So it can be beneficial, as shown on the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side it can be inflammatory. So you've got too much exercise is a bad thing, and it's about identifying where someone's at. And so many athletes push themselves to get best performance, that they're pushing themselves closer and closer and closer, maybe not to the bell-shaped curve, but maybe to the cliff, where they actually fall off and then get ill and injured. So that's the challenge with many athletes, is to exercise as hard as you can often and train as hard as you can to be as good as you can without getting ill and injured. And that's a vital component. And this is a description of the previous slide. So it seems that the release of interleukin-6 from a contracting muscle can be attenuated by long-term antioxidant supplementation. So there's an interesting sort of contradiction coming up in this presentation, is that antioxidants are good for reducing that interleukin-6, which is a really powerful negative inflammatory cytokine. In this particular study, just a small amount of vitamin C, 500 milligrams with 400 IU of vitamin E, markedly attenuated the release of interleukin-6 from active muscle. So a very good thing to happen. And the plasma interleukin-6 and cortisol response to a 3 hours of dynamic, both legs involved exercise at 50% of maximum power compared to placebo. So really great benefits from just taking the humble vitamin C and vitamin E. There are other studies like it, as I refer to here. The studies have been conducted in the 90s and the 2000s as well. So reducing interleukin-6 and cortisol response would be expected to limit the exercise-induced depression of immune function. That's exactly what happens. And it seems just vitamin C alone, or in combination with other antioxidants, help reduce the upper respiratory tract infections of ultramarathon runners. So when you're talking about with a runner, maybe the antioxidants are particularly important for this group, and/or rowers and runners, probably triathletes as well. That's where these antioxidants may be relevant. Hold that thought. We know that the upper respiratory illness is the most common reason for people presenting illness in terms of athletics and sports. The majority are respiratory viruses that have been reactivated effectively, or possibly allergic responses, less so bacterial. And what's really great from this is again Gleason's work in 2016, so much more recently, found that the salivary IgA test, although it has a certain cost, if the individual can afford it, you can actually use secretory eye testing as a monitoring tool to identify whether the individual is at risk of this upper respiratory tract infection, which then, guess what? It puts them off for a week, their training goes down, and it makes a huge dent on their targets for performance, particularly if they're involved in training for peaking for certain events. Dietary supplementation could be useful. It's unlikely that any one of those would have a direct benefit, but the combination, I think, is probably going to work best. So you've got colostrum, certain probiotics, and we'll learn more about that in other webinars, and selected antioxidants. So it's not just vitamin C and E, can probably reduce, and has been shown to reduce, the severity of URTIs. One can also consider beta-glucans from mushroom extracts as well. It's also been appreciated that there's an array of nutrients. So like with anybody with any condition, guess what? It's not just one nutrient, there's an array. So if someone's low in iron, you do want to ensure they've got adequate iron, but if they've got adequate iron, beware of iron because it's a pro-oxidant. Zinc, vital for immunity. Familiar with vitamins A, D, E, B6 and B12, particularly important for immune function. So we have an array of nutrients, vitamins and minerals. And as I've already stated, consuming carbohydrate during prolonged, strenuous, continuous exercise definitely helps to reduce and limit the degree of exercise-induced immune depression. So that's where carbohydrate sachets and gels can make a big difference. We know that they're refined and etc., but it makes a big difference to an athlete's performance. If they continually exercise without engaging in that carb ingestion during a long event, that will be a negative to their performance and their immune system. So these things are very important. And the number of companies out there, again, selling an awful lot of these gels and liquids, very, very important to support that. They don't require digestion, so it's not the same as eating something whole grain or a flapjack, for example, which would take some time for digestion. Similar effects can be seen to the carbohydrates with antioxidants, high doses, particularly vitamin C, vitamin A, and so on. I'll come on to that. And again, the combination of certain amino acids, even with colostrum, echinacea, and zinc, unlikely on their own, but together. And there's also been research showing that the plant polyphenol quercetin also supports the individuals against illness. So what I've done here is I've summarized the information that I found from research. Immune protection for athletes is very self-explanatory. So nutrients, colostrum, probiotics, amino acids, polyphenols, mushroom extract for beta-glucans, echinacea, and certain minerals. So, and then what I've done is I've translated this, as you may be familiar if you've tuned into our webinars before. I looked to translate this in something more meaningful, and so I've actually seen if I can identify what products that would relate to, and I've listed them here for you. For you to select for the individual in front of you. I'm not suggesting by any means everyone takes all these, it's just choosing what you need. Remember, on the lower left, Espuladi and the Lactobacillus GG, and we have a new product, Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG, that's 2.5 to 3 times better value than the previous Culturelle, just so you know if you're listening. So we've actually had this, we basically have one formulated that is 2.3 to 3 times better value than the Culturelle. It's the same product, just simply rebranded. So I'm just alerting you to that now. Again, choosing your not your weapons, but choosing your supplements wisely. Injury prevention, hugely related to immunity, but also there is a definite crossover. So again, carbohydrate depletion leads to muscle protein as fuel supply, increases muscle injuries. It's so straightforward. So making sure that our sports folk have got adequate carbohydrates is so important. It's almost like the opposite of the conversation you're having with many other clients who perhaps want to engage in some sort of, dare I say, intermittent fasting or optimizing their weight loss by reducing the carbohydrates. A lot of conversations about lower carb or low carb. Well, athletes need to have adequate carbohydrate, and that's why there's so many companies out there selling these carbohydrate gels to ensure that athletes can have them handily available, and it definitely has a benefit. You also need to have adequate high quality dietary protein, we'll talk about that, to repair muscle damage caused by exercise. In fact, I recommend, you may be aware that certain athletes jump into a cold bath after exercise, particularly if it's been impact exercise. In fact, Wimbledon, they've actually changed the underground now, which used to be underground changing rooms. They've actually dedicated a whole area for ice baths where the tennis players can go and sit in the ice baths together after they've had a hard tennis game. But so that's a consideration as well in terms of habitual. Can individuals engage in some sort of cold bath after their exercise to minimize the micro damage and the inflammation that's been caused by their event? Injured athletes should aim for 1.5 to 2 grams per kilogram body weight for protein, which is higher than the usual for athletes, effectively, and much higher than recreational users. So that means that 150 pound or 68 kilogram athletes, about my weight, would require 102 to 136. Again, they have a range. So again, it's not fixed. So have a range of protein needs daily during healing from injury, and where the protein needs to be consumed during the day in divided doses. But it needs to be sufficiently big enough dose to stimulate the anabolic drive. I'll come back to the protein a bit more. In terms of injury prevention, a number of nutrients which I'm sure you'll be familiar with, vitamins, basically it's C, E, and D, and collagen, they've all been shown to play a role in injury prevention. One statistic from one review showed that 77% of the general population was found to be vitamin D insufficient. So guess what? The athletes might fall in the same category, unless, of course, they're running outdoors or playing outdoors and having much more sunshine, in which case maybe they're a group that aren't so insufficient. But what's fascinating is that there was a discovery of the vitamin D receptor within muscle, which suggests a significant role for vitamin D in muscle tissue, and has since been identified as a regulator of skeletal muscle. Will there never cease to be more good information about vitamin D? So we want to minimize inflammation, ensuring the whole food diet, but not necessarily a whole food diet the whole time, particularly not during exercise, with an array of plant antioxidants. So it's the rainbow of color with veggies, and particularly focusing on these nutrients. So it's vitamin C, vitamin E, beta-carotene, vitamin A, selenium, and zinc in particular. I provided references, and I provided you with the links. If you can't get to the links, then you can put in the title, and you can see which ones are full papers and which ones are abstracts. So more papers for you there. And so here is a summary of what to consider for injury prevention. So we've got certain nutrients on the left-hand side, adequate carbohydrate. And note the range here from the research. It says 5 to 12 grams per kilogram. So a big difference, and it really depends on how long the exercise is, how big the individual is. So again, there's no set idea about what the carbohydrate should be. It's actually all in grams per kilogram, and we'll talk about that more about protein. Minimizing inflammation, absolutely vital, which is where the cold bath comes in. In fact, I would consider proteolytic enzymes, which I haven't put on the slide, but proteolytic enzymes taken after exercise. So Intenzyme Forte is my go-to proteolytic enzyme. Taking maybe 8, 9, 10, 12 after a hard bout of physical exercise can actually help to have the same effect as a cold bath, in fact, to minimize that microinflammation. And you want the basis of a good balance of fatty acids. Don't overdo it with omega-3, don't underdo it with omega-6, and it's good quality omega-6 with good quality omega-3. So balance of fatty acids. You want adequate protein for muscle protein synthesis. That's what the MPS stands for. You want a consistent intake over the day, and you need sufficient amount in one intake to have an anabolic expression to help the healing. Proper hydration, we've covered that in brief, but it's vital to get adequate hydration. And then key minerals, zinc and selenium, have been found to be involved in injury prevention. And consider a pre-digested collagen. Unless it's pre-digested, it won't be very well absorbed. So you've got a number of different things to consider. Is the individual in front of you more prone to immune issues, getting infections, or are they more prone to injuries? And boy, it can take a lot out psychologically. It's really horrible. Injuries lead to depression, and so it's vital that that's engaged with, either healed as quickly as possible or prevented, an ounce of prevention being better. And I've translated the slide into certain supplements where appropriate that you can consider to refer to when you need this information. So we got a very good BioProtect antioxidant formula. We got the very well absorbed emulsified vitamin D. You've got the Body Balance Oil, which is a 4:1 ratio of fats. You've got whey protein isolate. You've got collagen R-thread, and you've got various different minerals, and you've got the vital electrolyte concentrate. I would say that's an absolute must for virtually every single sports person out there. Adequate hydration, just getting that right. Adequate water with electrolytes. So we're talking about now protein, one of my favorite subjects. Which are your favorite subjects? Can we think of what they are? Well, protein needs it's always been a little bit of a one of my favorites, and maybe I don't know why. Now, resistance training is recommended to enhance, to make you stronger, and that's achieved by a number of different means. It's not just about bulking up, which is effectively skeletal muscle hypertrophy, but it's improved by neuromuscular recruitment. So in fact, the more regularly you resist a weight, the more likely you are to be able to recruit muscles to support your body. But it goes, I'm getting used to pushing against this weight or lifting against this weight, and my legs are getting used to sort of having to work harder. I think the body basically develops a better neuromuscular recruitment, so you can basically engage more muscles in the activity. There's also a fiber type transition from fast twitch to slow twitch, or slow twitch to fast twitch, depending on what you're doing. Fast twitch muscles obviously do with sprint, slow twitch to do with endurance running. Even if the marathon runners run really fast, it's still more of a slow twitch muscle, particularly in the calf muscles. So fiber type transition can occur. You're born with a certain genetic disposition, but you can extend that in one direction or depending on the training. So that's the epigenetic effect. Now, the rate and amount of muscle hypertrophy, which is the sort of the adaptation to the having been worked, that is associated with resistance training, is influenced by a wide array of variables. Surprise, surprise. It's the training program makes a difference, the training experience, the gender, the genetic disposition, and the nutritional status of the individual. There have been various different dietary interventions that have been proposed to influence muscle hypertrophy, including manipulation of protein intake in particular. Certain amino acids can definitely contribute, the branched chain amino acids and leucine of the 3 branched chain amino acids in particular. There are specific supplements that could help too, which can support the anabolic process, and also what they call the creation of an energy surplus, i.e. eating more, eating more food. And eating more food seems to engage the anabolic process, even if it's not protein. We'll talk a bit about that too. Where does that energy need to come from? It seems just eating more food and you'll help to gain more weight and gain more muscle to a certain degree. But what's the most effective way of doing it? I'll be talking about that. And recent research has provided a significant insight into optimization of dietary protein intake and application of evidence-based supplements, and the specific energy surplus, so how much food you need to eat to facilitate that muscle growth. And it's basically a lot of it has been unknown. However, there is clear evidence of anabolic stimulus possible from energy surplus, even independent of resistance training. So simply eating more can increase the growth. So let's talk a bit about high protein and how much we need. So high quality protein, which contains all the essential amino acids, referred to as a high biological value protein, for muscle protein synthesis and repair. So basically, it's also basically synonymous with high. So the high quality is with protein density. How protein dense is your meal? And vegetarian foods and vegan foods, and I'll touch on that as well in a bit, they're not protein dense. You have to eat more food to get the protein. So protein density is a very, very useful term. You need a consistent intake over the day. You might need 20 to 30 grams of high quality protein 3 to 5 times a day, depending on your weight. This individual, 70-kilogram man, for example, they might require 30 grams of protein 5 times a day. It's only really achievable if you've got a whey protein or a vegan protein shake or powder you can mix up and consume on at least 2 occasions during the day, in addition to whatever food you're eating. So very difficult to achieve with food, I would say. Maybe I'm overstating it, but kind of most people can't eat. They can't eat a large fillet of fish 5 times a day. They can't eat 3 eggs 5 times a day, effectively. Well, eggs, if an egg is 7 to 8 grams, you're talking about 4 eggs to achieve 30 grams, 4 or 5 eggs to achieve 30 grams, and we can't eat that 5 times a day. So protein powders really are needed. It's just very difficult. This is where we're at. So it's the consumption of high biological value protein meals and snacks in close proximity to training is widely applied as a strategy to augment that muscle adaptive response to resistance exercise. So of those intakes, if you consume the protein soon after exercise, that's probably and deemed to be the best way to go. So really important. So skeletal muscle may be enhanced by a wider distribution of daily intake over the day rather than a big amount eaten once. But we're still talking sufficient amount in each of those intakes. So again, how many times can we eat? But basically, if it's 21 grams, I would say minimum for a 70-kilogram person, maybe even 30 grams to get enough protein for what's required. So just really emphasizing the need for high biological value protein. Thank goodness for modern technology that can convert something into a vegan or vegetarian protein powder or a whey protein powder, which may have no casein. So lots of different types of protein. That's the International Society of Sports Nutrition. I'm a fan of this group and of Antonio and his colleague. It's called Leaf is his surname. They've done lots of work on this, and they're looking at, again, protein intakes of 1.4 to 2 grams per kilogram per day for physically active individuals. It's not just not safe. I mean, it's not just safe, but it may be absolutely vital to improve adaptations to exercise training. So really key to get the protein up. If they are talking to a vegetarian or vegan, they need to have protein powders, effectively, because it's an awful lot of food they're going to have to eat to get that much protein in. So researchers haven't found what's called the sweet spot. So identifying exactly how much energy needs to be consumed for optimal muscle gain relative to muscle fat. This is for people who want to gain skeletal muscle, and that will be relevant in some arenas of sport like rugby, for example, where size, the bigger you are, the better you are, as it were, and many other sports like boxing or certain other sports may be weight related, in which case you don't want to increase your mass, in which case you wouldn't be eating more. So whether you're a jockey, you're a boxer, you're a judoist, martial artist, etc., they're always weight related, and so you don't want to gain the weight. So this is for individuals who needs to gain weight. And here we have a nice diagram by Slater and his colleagues, looking at enhanced skeletal muscle atrophy, looking at the factors, the 6 different factors that contribute to the energy cost of skeletal muscle hypertrophy. So I really recommend you have a look at this diagram in more detail. If you want to consider the factors about what is needed to be overcome to help to improve someone's muscle mass, you've got to consider the diet-induced thermogenesis, the non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and also the energy cost of the increased turnover of protein in the body, which there is. So when you eat the protein, it takes energy to convert it into muscle. And so how much energy should be increased, and these researchers refer to kilojoules. So I provided a conversion of kilojoules to kilocalories, and really, if you want to improve muscle mass and weight gain, you might need to eat 956, almost 1,000 calories a day extra to achieve that. But it depends on how much you need and what weight you're at already and how much you want to gain effectively. But you can see the conversion to calories. So from 358 to 956 kilocalories has been shown in this research. Where should it come from? Do we eat protein? Do we eat carbohydrates? Do we eat a combination of them? And so here's a little bit of an explanation. If muscle is 75% water, 20% protein, 5% fat, and it's got a little bit of glycogen, and 1 kilogram is made up of that mix, then the energy required to accumulate such tissue must at a minimum equal the sum of its parts. So basically you need to have enough of those different ingredients so you need to have adequate protein, adequate carbohydrate, and some fat in order to support that growth effectively. And so given the assumed composition of skeletal muscle, the energy stored in 1 kilogram is about 5 to 5,200 kilojoules. If we go back up the slide, we can see that that's going to be over 1,000 calories per 1 kilogram, with 3,400 from protein. If I go back up again, you can see that's 813 kilocalories from protein in 1 kilogram of muscle, and you've got a small amount from fat and a small amount again from muscle glycogen. So studies again don't give definitive answers. So in fact, I'm sorry, I can't give you this is what you need to recommend to your athletes. Guess what? Everyone's individualized, and the ranges that the research show us are quite broad. So that's why it's so important to start with where the athlete's at, and then take steps to either increase their protein or increase their fat or increase their carbohydrate from where they're at. And there isn't much research when it comes to overfeeding exercise individuals, and it's confined really to the effects of manipulating protein. So studies have not been conducted where they said, well, let's see how much fat we can give an athlete and see what happens then. They've really just focused on protein. And the individuals who ate more protein actually lost more fat mass. So actually they gained more muscle and lost fat by eating more protein. And protein certainly is thermogenic in its effect. So high protein diets. This is Leaf. This is a colleague, Antonio and Leaf. This really great paper in 2017. I recommend you have a look at this if you're interested. And they state the following: considering that high protein diets have not been shown to adversely affect kidney health or bone health or metabolic health in athletes, they haven't been shown, or the bulking athlete, it appears to be best served to consume more than 2.2 grams per kilogram per day, and perhaps as high as 3.4 grams to achieve the best benefits. So whether consuming more than this provides any additional benefit requires investigation. It's been found that once you go above a certain amount of protein, you don't get any more benefits, but actually you get the calories only without extra muscle mass. So really interesting is that it's a high level of protein, and it hasn't been shown. It's the first paper, I think, that was published in 2017 for 1 year assessment of a high protein diet, found no negatives whatsoever. Very interesting paper, that. And when should this exercise be consumed? Simple answer is spread over the day. It's not recommended to have a large portion at any one time. So it's the regular intake that actually stimulates that process. There are some individuals who want to reduce their overall intake of calories, so it's referred to as caloric restriction, and maybe these are athletes involved in maintaining their weight to hit their weight for their fighting weight, for example. And there's evidence that protein needs increase in those athletes when they restrict calories or they have low body fat. So again, more protein is needed, essentially. And so the conclusion was that those individuals, and they refer to free fat mass here, which is different to their body weight, but the resistance trained athletes, if they're reducing their calories, they might need 2.3 to 3.1 grams per kilogram, scaled upwards with severity of caloric restriction and leanness. So if someone is reducing the calories to achieve their weight, you don't reduce their diet equitably according to their macronutrient ratio. You actually need to increase the protein effectively. Veganism. I'm very pro a plant-based diet and for the planet and for all kinds of other reasons. And it's a challenge, however, to get enough protein and B12 and iron and zinc. So you need to be aware that these nutrients may be insufficient, and certainly aware of the omega-3 fatty acids too, or always conscious of the fact that we need omega-6 too. So, however, with the benefit of basic supplementation, it's quite possible to get a very sound, nourishing vegan diet can be designed. But I wouldn't know how you did that, particularly with protein and certain nutrients, without supplements. I just don't know how that's achieved. There are certain nutrients that could be useful for vegans in particular, like creatine, maybe in carnitine and beta-alanine supplementation, because those are low in a vegetarian diet. There's something you may have seen on Netflix, The Game Changers. It features Arnold Schwarzenegger and Lewis Hamilton, produced by the famous director James Cameron. It's well worth a view. And there was an interesting an MD PhD, Gil Carvalho. He comes across quite well and I've given you a link to his fact checks. So he gives a little summary review of The Game Changers, and I think it's worth watching both of those to give you a sense of where they're at. Now, in terms of carbohydrate protein ratios, what should we do? And there's no fixed ratio either. So again, we discovered that, Anthony, I was tuning into this webinar to find out about this specifically. Well, I'm sorry to say that there is no researched, absolute definitive guide. Some researchers say about 3 to 4 to 1 carbohydrate to protein, but that's particularly useful for endurance athletes. And if you're not an endurance athlete, maybe you could have that ratio would then be smaller. And what's really important, and this is something that I bang the desk about on a number of occasions, if you base your diet on percentages, it's very misleading and not helpful at all. So, so here's the example. If you consume a low energy diet of 1,000 calories, of which 35% of the calories were derived from protein, it would amount to a paltry 87.5 grams compared to, let's say, the individual needs 150. So it'd be too low. Instead, high protein diet should always be defined as the amount of protein consumed per unit of body weight. So it's a certain percentage of protein, brackets, number of grams per kilogram, and then carbohydrate and fat, and so on. So it does depend on the training routine as to how much carbohydrates required. 3 to 12 grams of carbohydrates body weight throughout the day. That's a massive difference in carbohydrates. So again, we need to look at the individual, look at what they're doing, what their sport is, what their weight is, and how they fare on a certain amount already before we make changes. It's only a guideline for estimating carbohydrate needs, and again, it depends on how long and the type of training sessions, etc., as to when and how the carbohydrate should be adjusted. Again, some sports authorities say that athletes should consume 3 to 4 grams per kilogram body weight, but I'd always go by the individual. Consuming carbohydrates during workouts that last over an hour certainly can benefit performance and delay the onset of fatigue. So that's useful, protects against muscle breakdown and injury as well. Athletes who participate in intermittent sports should also focus on more carbohydrates during training and competition. Watch out for fructose. So it's got fructose, and I recommend the book Fat Chance by Robert Lustig, who will talk to you about the negative impact of fructose, actually promoting fatty liver essentially. Then we talk about fats. So it's the least research of all the 3 macronutrients in terms of what's best for an athlete to consume. Percentages are misleading, and you really want to focus on the grams per kilogram body weight. But effectively, if you've got to eat something, you get your calories from somewhere. Is it protein, fat, and carbohydrate, and fat, and how much you're going to consume, etc. High quality and fresh is what counts. Don't consume hydrogenated or trans fats, very obviously. And fats and oils accompany many protein foods and certain plant foods, including avocados, nuts and seeds, as well as the animal foods, eggs, fish and meat. So you got fat bound into those foods already. And so it is a fascinating. There's no ideal percentage, but it's estimated that 20 to 35% of total calories, and there may be a need for more because you want to reduce the carbohydrates for people who need a certain weight effectively. Medium chain triglycerides can be viewed as an exception because they can deliver energy directly to the mitochondria. And what's interesting is, in spite of improving fat oxidation, helping fat loss, research does not show a definite improvement in physical performance. So it's not proven that that's the case. Let me talk about antioxidants and exercise. Lots of benefits with antioxidants. We may be able to refer to that, and something we've been studying for years, all of us. But it's less appreciated how antioxidants can be useful in sport. In fact, it's been shown that antioxidants may inhibit the adaptive response to training, and that isn't controversial. It's pretty well documented. To me, it's a question of degree and which antioxidant inhibits what. So we're going to learn in future. You've got specific targeted mitochondrial antioxidants that may be very, very useful to take during exercise, and you may not need the general antioxidants like vitamin C and vitamin E, which we referred to earlier as being useful for immunity and injury prevention, because that might stop the exercise training induced skeletal muscle adaptations. I recommend you read this paper by Troy Merry and Micah Risto. They've dedicated lots of time and they have great expertise. I think they're both PhDs on antioxidants interfering with skeletal muscle adaptation. So here is a diagram showing you the benefits in green about what antioxidants can serve you for. So less upper respiratory tract infections, less injury could make the difference. And so you say, right, well, I'm going with this. I'm going with the antioxidants. Less muscle damage immediately after exercise, less fatigue and greater recovery. Equally, antioxidants could lead to less good recovery, less good hypertrophy, less mitochondrial biogenesis, less cell defense, and less insulin sensitivity, interestingly, and less angiogenesis. So it's a question of saying, from the literature, and the scientists say, well, we probably wouldn't go for too many supplements, too many antioxidants, but I don't think they're taking into account, maybe they haven't ever looked after athletes, but certainly if you stop an athlete being ill or injured and you can support their health with antioxidants, that is a winner. You basically got them performing throughout the whole season, so it makes a big difference. So there's a definite sort of scales here, or seesaw, about what one should and shouldn't. But remember, we're going to learn more in due course with the studies being conducted about specific targeted mitochondrial antioxidants as opposed to general antioxidants. This is one of them, astaxanthin, which I talked about in intermittent fasting. It's a natural carotenoid type it's a polyphenol type antioxidant. It's actually what makes the color of lobster, I think, go pink. And it has significantly greater antioxidant function than the beta-carotene and vitamin E. As you can see, 10 times greater than beta-carotene, 100 times greater than vitamin E. And it's also helps them to stimulate the intrinsic NRF2 expression within the body, alongside the upregulation of endogenous antioxidant enzymes, including SOD, catalase, and glutathione, following the taking of astaxanthin. So astaxanthin is sort of Mr. Muscle, potentially, of antioxidants, and here are references for astaxanthin. And despite the information I've just shared with you about antioxidants, and whilst more research is needed, astaxanthin may promote recovery through inhibiting the oxidative and inflammatory responses due to the physiological stress of training. And it seems that also in terms of benefiting mitochondria, antioxidant supports that aspect of the biogenesis of mitochondria. So that contradicts what antioxidants might do in the diagram, saying it might inhibit muscle mitochondrial biogenesis. Astaxanthin may support it. So again, I think the specific antioxidants need to be appreciated. And it protects against muscle loss, even in sedentary folk, in elderly individuals. And it's one of the very, very few nutrients on the planet that can achieve that feat. So just taking it preserves your lean muscle mass whilst you do nothing, when that's the biggest issue with old people who are sort of on hospital beds, and within a week they've lost muscle mass, which they'll never regain, and affects their health forever. More references on astaxanthin. Now, there are some specific nutrients to sport supplements which one can take, and they can be referred to as ergogenic aids. So sufficient high biological value protein, i.e. in protein powders, absolutely number one, possibly, given that the electrolytes wouldn't be considered to be an ergogenic aid. Within that high biological value protein, you already have branched chain amino acids, so BCAAs, that's leucine, isoleucine, and valine. But a downstream metabolite of leucine is beta-hydroxymethylbutyrate, or HMB. And that can be taken too. And I found that different individuals might require different things. Some people require the whole protein, like whey, or indeed a pea protein. And some individuals might benefit from branched chain amino acids, and some individuals might benefit from leucine, and some individuals might benefit from HMB. It's difficult to tell, but actually, ideally, we'd go for the high biological value protein first, and potentially use of branched chain amino acids when you're training. That's 1/3 of muscle mass is the branched chain amino acids. We've covered the electrolytes, vital. creatine monohydrate. It results in greater levels of water to be accumulated in the muscles, so muscles can get bigger, plumped up if you like, and that can support some degree of physical strength and performance outcomes, but it can actually have a bigger impact on look of physique rather than actual sports performance outcome. Beta-alanine may also be supportive of muscle growth. Caffeine before certain events, never drinking it in any other occasion, but just having it before a longer distance event, middle distance, longer distance event, can support energy, and that's been documented. NT factor, which is a glycophospholipid that supports the cell membrane, that has been shown to improve ATP production, and that's definitely something to consider for energy. Bicarbonate of soda is something to be used, can be poorly tolerated in some, but drinking it's not much fun, but it can be a great buffer for lactic acid where that's relevant for the athlete. But you may be well familiar with beet it and beetroot juices and derivatives of beetroot, which provide nitrates, which can support nitric oxide energy support. And then lastly on this list is CBD oil, particularly useful where there's pain. I mean, particularly in rugby players, for example. I know that's something that's being explored right now in the Premier Rugby League with the top players, but CBD oil can be useful to reduce and support the management of pain and also help sleep and therefore recovery. So it can be very, very useful, CBD oil. So there we have some ergogenic support. So now glutamine, you may say, well, Anthony, what about glutamine? I was heard this as an all-round wonder amino acid. I remember this sort of coming out, if you will, in the 1990s, saying, oh, glutamine is the best thing for leaky gut. It helps brain fuel, it helps your muscle. And also, it has been shown to spare branched chain amino acids as well. However, in this very interesting paper published in June 2019, the effect of glutamine supplementation on athletic performance, body composition, and immune function, the researchers said this, and I put it in red. According to the meta-analysis, and I think it was 47 studies, yes, 47 studies, they came to this conclusion. So they did the work in 2018, it was published in 2019. According to this meta-analysis, generally, glutamine supplementation has no effect on the athletics immune system, aerobic performance, and body composition. So glutamine is not on the list of ergogenic aids as a result of this updated information, and it's something I will share with you that I have found this to be the case for many years. When it first came out in the 1990s, I used glutamine a lot in the first, dare I say, maybe 3-6 months, and had so little benefit from it that I've hardly ever used it since. And I've discovered that effectively a high biological value protein will be much more effective. Again, similar with gut lining, is using glutamine in one of the nutrients, sure, but in a mix of key nutrients rather than on its own. So my recommendation to you, and it is my recommendation, but it has been on many years of clinical experience, but this sort of information helps confirm it, is not to use glutamine as a single amino acid supplement. Sure, it's going to be a component of any protein mix, and sure, it's going to be a component of any gut lining formula, but it's a part of it. It's just like using bricks only to build a house. We need a whole lot more of cement, mortar, etc., 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 to build a house, and not just the bricks. So in summary, and again, really appreciate your fast listening and commitment to your own ongoing education. Here's a summary of the information I'm sharing with you today. So establish the performance goals at the outset in engaging in at least one nutritionally relevant or functional medicine test that maybe is an ongoing monitoring test. And maybe that will be secretory IgA, for example, to monitor the response to training. Optimal hydration is vital, can make a real difference. And just that one alone, you could actually improve someone's time, running time, cycling time, and the recovery and the way they feel afterwards as well. So vital. Again, during, and post exercise, absolutely vital. The balanced electrolyte concentrate can be a boon to achieve that. And then sufficient protein. You might be surprised with how much protein is required. I have researched a study for going on, actually about 70 hours worth that I can just think of in my head, and all the researchers show the same thing about the need for protein. As we get older, we need more protein, and if you have less calories, you need more protein, and you need adequate protein. Yes, you need adequate protein. The good news is that companies now can make vegan or vegetarian proteins where that's appropriate. So you don't just have to rely on a dairy product or an animal product to achieve that protein. But you can't get it really from vegetarian foods without eating an awful lot of food to get that protein, because it's not protein dense. Keep free of injury and illness, absolutely vital. Again, if you could just achieve that, if you just recommend supplements, including the antioxidants, to achieve less illness or no illness, and less injury or no injury, that make a huge difference. Oh, I tell you, athletes would pay for that. Sports people pay for that. It makes such a difference. And nutritional supplements can make a big difference in terms of reducing that risk. So nutritional supplements come into their own to prevent illness and injury compared to just food alone. And do be aware that general antioxidants, they may inhibit the adaptive response to exercise, although there is some thought that this effect may be overcome by training itself. So the more you train, you might actually overcome the negative impact of antioxidants diminishing that adaptive response. So, you know, I'm in the camp of listening to the individual. I've used antioxidants with many individuals, sports folk, and I found them to be very effective. And again, if it's just improving injury and illness, I'm very happy. That individual is very happy to continue to use those. I'm aware that in the future, more targeted mitochondrial specific antioxidants may be more researched, and we'd have more information about that. Base your recommendations on their existing lifestyle and diet. Don't prescribe any general protocols is my recommendation. If you go with a macronutrient ratios, it's misleading. Identify how much protein they need, how much carbs they need, and then go from there. And I recommend a wide array of veggies and phytonutrient and fibers. But again, some people like runners may not require such a high fiber diet because it goes through their guts too quickly. So be aware of the sport, be aware of what they want to achieve. These dietary components are rarely included in standard recommendations, because they just focus on fat, protein, carbohydrate. But the plants, the whole plant diet, hugely relevant, and that's actually in a way what the game changers focus on is more of a plant-based diet. But equally in that video, they show lots of, I would say, refined processed vegetarian food, which wouldn't be particularly healthy. So, and there are specific benefits to be had from these specific sports ergogenic aid supplements. So what I've done lastly is to summarize that. So here's a summary for performance, illness and injury prevention, nutrients to consider. We've got branching amino acids, protein, we've got hydration, of course, we've got mucosal immune support, vital. Mucosal immune support, absolutely vital. Watch out for our newsletter on Friday, where Mike Ash and I have presented information on supporting mucosal immunity related to viral infections such as the coronavirus. So we've got a company statement coming out on Friday about that. Nitrates for nitric oxide synthesis, endocannabinoid system support where pain is involved, creatine, caffeine, NT factor, and so on. I've translated this into this diagram where we can look specific supplements just to make it easier to translate those into products effectively, into things that people can buy and take. In due course, there's going to be more information I know about specific antioxidants. I'm looking forward to that, showing that they really can make a difference to sports performance without negatively affecting the adaptive response to training. So that here endeth this one. So I'll leave you with that. So thank you so much indeed for attending. Lots of information I appreciate. I do speak quickly. Hope you can use this as a point of reference, this set of slides. Do ask or send in questions in the next 48 hours, please, to the email shown here, anthony@nutrilink.co.uk, no H in Anthony. Thank you very much indeed. I'll do my best to get that to you next week. Sometimes I get interrupted, so apologies for that. If it's a longer case you have about a certain individual that you've been prompted to think about, or it's one of the reasons you're on the webinar today because you've got a sports client, do consider putting that on the CE forum for a more comprehensive response. So I'm hoping that's been of use to you. Some real basics in there, so there's no apology at all about that. Adequate hydration, absolutely vital. Adequate protein, absolutely vital. I mean, and then going to bed on time, and then not playing lots of video games at night, for example, like some athletes are prone to be doing. So there are some really basic things that can make a big difference, and it may well be worthwhile setting up some form of monitoring or recording, whether it's on a notepad, about times, performance, just so you've got a record. Keeping records, so important for athletes. They love to see the change in things. If they're doing weights, are they lifting stronger weights or more repetitions? Keeping a record of things so you can compare, and then preparing a graph. What I've done with a lot of my sports clients is I have prepared a graph. I put the information on a spreadsheet and I prepared a graph showing them this month, next month, and then show a graph to show the difference. Very, very simple. Represent it to the client, and they can see that their sleep is better and their energy use over the day is better, and then their performance improved by 10 seconds or by 2 minutes or whatever it might be, and just so you can correlate the things together. So do become familiar, if you're not already, with spreadsheets and simple graph presentation. Really effective, really useful. Again, it gives feedback, and it's well documented that motivation is intrinsically linked to feedback. Effectively give feedback, of how someone's doing, and that can really help to engage their motivation to continue in the changes for optimal nutrition. So thank you again for listening. I really hope that's been of use to you and it's going to be a good reference guide. Thank you again for listening into a Nutri-Link webinar. Please join me for the next one. Thank you very much indeed for being there, and I look forward to the next one. Look forward to your questions and look forward to our next contact. So farewell, bye for now.